We're about to go into our final community panel of the day, which focuses on responding and explores some of the ways that people are learning to work differently. The panel is facilitated by Lisa Smith, who many of you will know from her service to Te Kupenga Whakaoti Mahi Patunga, the National Network of Family Violence Services. Lisa is leading Manaaki Ropū to help enable Māori and Crown relationships in the family violence and sexual violence system. Joining Lisa are Stewart Eadie from Dove, Danielle Oakes from Te Ahi Kaa, and Burgess from Safeguarding Adults. Stewart is the General Manager of Dove Hawke's Bay, a service working with individuals and whānau impacted by family violence. Stewart has been on a journey over the last 3 years to bring about transformational evidence-based change to better serve the people who engage with their services. Danielle is of Waikato and Whakatōhea Whakapapa and is the Pouarahi for Te Ahi Kaa, a kaupapa Māori health and social service that sits on the boundary between Auckland and Waikato. The team at Te Ahi Kaa have been supporting the establishment of a kaumātua-led network, where kaumātua are designing a locally informed kaupapa Māori framework to prevent the abuse of kaumātua throughout Waikato and Auckland. Toni Burgess, kia ora, is a foundational member of the Enabling Good Lives Mid-Central Leadership Group as a disabled people's representative. They were involved in the high-level design of the Safeguarding Adults from Abuse framework and have been part of the Disability Reference Group for the pilot of the Safeguarding Adults from Abuse cross-agency response in Waitemata. ENTS also sits on the Disability Reference Group for the Royal Commission inquiry into historical abuse in care. I'm very inspired already just from reading all of these bios. As the panel gets underway, please submit any questions you have on Slido. We really would appreciate this. This is the time, whānau, the very last panel for the day, and we'll work to get those through to Lisa for the panel to answer. Following the panel, the CEs offering reflections are Andrew Kibblewhite, Secretary for Justice and Deputy Chair of the Te Puna Aonui Board, and Geraldine Clifford Lidstone, CE of the Ministry for Pacific People. Yay! Okay, it's now my pleasure to hand you over to Lisa. Paki, Mike.
Wow, ngā mihi nui whānau. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and it's a pleasure to, so in build-up for our kōrero here today, we had a bit of whanaungatanga because we realised that whanaungatanga is only everything, and we wanted to have a kōrero with on stage today that was a collegial kōrero as opposed to an interview. And I have to say I've learnt some awesome stuff about our panel, but before I go any further, I just want to mihi to our Minister and to Te Puna Aonui and to Te Pū Kotahitanga, who have, in a relatively short amount of time, created a different system to what we've had in the previous 10, 20, 30 years. And even though it's only new, it's something different, and that I, for one, am committed to giving it a go, with giving it my best shot. And I look at all the people here, and I look at all of you who are dedicated to supporting our victims, survivors, and those who use violence to help them get a better quality of life that many of us experience every day. But I also can look across this room and go, yeah, there's a third of us wahine that have experienced family violence. And how you know, I just wanted to mihi to you, and I also want to mihi to those that have not survived. And anyway, kia ora. So I'd like to take this opportunity to quell my nerves. Quell your fellas' nerves, are you all right? And to acknowledge all our whānau that are watching via online. There's a few of them that couldn't make it today. Some of our whānau missed their plane. Another whānau, their kaimahi got sick. And so, we're talking about the CEO of an organisation staying behind to carry on the mahi to keep our whānau safe. So, kia ora whānau. Today we're going to talk about the responding aspect of the tokotoru model. I just want to flag the tokotoru model because some of us are still wondering, the origin of it and wanting a deeper understanding of it. So I just want to pop that there. I wanted to start with you, Stewart. And if you would share with us a story about your work with Dove in the Hawke's Bay that illustrates some of the areas of progress and ways that you're enabling your workforce to remain engaged, energised and hopeful.
It's a big question. Maybe this time. My apologies. It's a big question. I stepped into the role 4 years ago into what was predominantly a white middle class family violence intervention that was working with 50% Māori. 50% of those walked through the door and were seeking help. I resonated with what Tamark was saying. I could see I had moved to the regions, I'd moved to Hawke's Bay, and I saw a generation of youth being undermined with sexual and family violence. And that's the fabric of the future. So I stepped into this organisation which I have a background in health, I have a background in academia and management, and I couldn't make sense of it. It was gendered, it was siloed. There was nothing and the models were colonial. So I set about undertaking, I contracted a Māori organisation to look at Māori models, to go out into the community and start that process of consultation. To another group to look at contemporary models around of intervention for family violence. They were done separately and then we pulled them together. And surprise, surprise, they actually said the same thing. Work with us as whānau. We don't want our children, our rangatahi, to experience what we have experienced. Understand our trauma, our early childhood trauma, the trauma of colonisation, and that set about a pathway that we haven't come back from. When you get that sort of feedback, you have got to take it on board. And I look at Te Aorerekura and the work of Te Punua Nui, that's the whole, what we were being taught, what we're being, given within that strategy is exemplified within it. That's been a journey. We had 5% of our workforce was Māori. It's now over 50%. It's got more governance Māori than it did before. Sorry, we'd had no governance. We now have more Māori. That's a transition. It's a change. That doesn't change everything. It's a continuous work. We're about to launch an early intervention program on a marae. That's a challenge, because that thinks outside of the square and challenges government departments about funding such a thing. They say, you do it, come back to us with the evidence. But we really need to, and I'll probably get my 5 minutes because I could talk for a long time.
I love your kōrero, Stewart. Stewart Eadie, Dove Hawke's Bay, our tauiwi whānau. You can contact him there for helpful hints on how he did it and what was it that led you to be so successful in it?
I have wonderful people around me. I have a wonderful governance board that right from the start, though they were tauiwi, and I'm one, and they bought in, they acknowledged, they supported, they funded. I've had phenomenal cultural support from tangata whenua. My staff believe in it, but it was taking them on a journey because they were used to working in that siloed model. That was the prescriptive model that is preeminent within our service. So you've got to take them on a journey, you've got to help them understand the evidence, you've got to feed back what the community is saying, and you've got to keep that community voice going.
Kia ora. Thanks, Stewart. Ants, kia ora, Ants. How you doing? How's Raven?
Can people hear me?
That's on.
It is on, eh? Oh, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
there we go.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lisa.
I was just going to say, how's Raven?
Yeah, no, she's looking okay.
Yeah.
She's just chilled. We're good as long as Alan doesn't step back.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I play with the interpreters. Focus, Ants.
So, Eds, I wanted to ask you if you could share a story with us that demonstrates the value of workforce capability frameworks and ensuring people can deliver appropriate responses to disabled people, and what examples that you can share of effective safeguarding of disabled adults.
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah, aroha mai.
I think for me and a lot of the disabled community, we'd like all of you out here to realise that we consider you as mainstream. Everybody's going, oh! What you are is from a disabled perspective, you are mainstream family and sexual violence workforce, yeah? And that's because we need to do things differently with disabled people. We need to ensure that if a person hasn't got good communication skills, that they have access to supported decision making, that they have access to the right interpreters, that they have access to information they can understand. How many people have used easy read documents before in this room? Oh, there's a smattering of hands. Okay? Easy read documents are a way for our learning disabled to actually understand what you're putting into those documents. And it's a really valuable tool, not only for people with learning disabilities, but we find a lot of our migrant services use them as well. Safeguarding adults. Ooh. One of the huge challenges in this space is when we start looking around capability and capacity of individuals. This label of unreliable witness, or the person doesn't have the intellectual capacity to make those calls or decisions or relay what's going on to them. We need more of you out there that understand that there are different ways of working, that you actually need to go out and talk to people like an organisation called Visible that understand the nuances in this community. And I know I'm going to use a story from a younger person, but it just demonstrates some of the nuances that you may not have thought about. There was a young man, he had 2 siblings, whānau. He had a learning disability, and unfortunately, quite often he would take that out on his siblings. The community reported that, and I can understand why, because they were coming to, the siblings were coming to school, bruises in places and all those sorts of things. An organisation came in, had a look at what was going on, and they uplifted the siblings. They couldn't find placement for our young disabled person with the right settings and safety around him. Them. 3 days later, that young man was found in a neighbour's swimming pool. Because what essentially had happened was the agency had come in and taken away that young man's safeguards. Because it was the brother and the sister that would go, hey, he's about to do a runner. In an adult space, one of the stories that I think for me that really highlights the lack of understanding across services and agencies is we had a deaf individual in our city over lockdown who got a bit drunk and belligerent, and the next thing he knew, He was actually facing resisting arrest charges because the police involved in the incident were trying to handcuff his hands behind his back. All he was trying to do was go, actually, I'm just trying to talk to you and tell you what's going on. And he was, having to face more charges on that. A lot of this is nuanced as well around family dynamics and how that works. A lot of people seem to believe that whānau and family are the only way through to talking to an individual with a disability. But we know that sometimes it's that relationship that's the abusive one. And we know that our systems aren't set up to deal with systemic violence towards disabled people. A lot of what's going on behind the scenes is attitudinal. I'll give you a really clear example. We've had to fight for the last 3 weeks to find somewhere to toilet my dog.
Yeah. Right here.
Right here. For this hui. And it's those underlying thoughts and behaviours that disabled people are invisible, that we're too complex to sort out, we'll do them later, that leads to a lot of us being in really unsafe situations. Did I answer the question?
Your kōrero's ka pai, thank you.
I have ADD, so you just got to watch where I go.
Trying to follow.
Trying to follow?
Oh, kia ora, Toni.
All good.
Danielle, how you doing?
Kia ora, I'm good, thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, nice.
I'm not going either.
Yeah.
Hello? No, mine doesn't seem to be going.
Well, check.
Check, check, check.
Check.
That might be
Yeah,
better.
cool. Yeah, sweet. They gave
Oh.
you the thumbs up.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. Are you able to share with us a story about Te Ahi Kaa in a way that showcases how you're working to build a multidisciplinary way of practicing and how you're helping kaimahi get through the tricky times given, the weather events in the Coromandel?
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. Kia ora e te whānau. Gosh, I coming up here, I thought to myself, man, I got landed with the worst spot of the day. It's the afternoon spot, it's the last spot, and it's the spot where people are feeling quite tired and quite drained. So I want to try to, I guess, keep my kōrero quite specific, and I'll try some humour. It's not my strength, but I want to, oh, there we go, we've got a little bit of a laugh. But yeah, I just want to really acknowledge sitting here and taking the kōrero, and as beautiful as the kōrero has been today, it's often quite a heavy one. So I think in terms of your question you've just asked, Lisa, I think the thing that I found really interesting is when some questions got sent through to us earlier, the first thing I thought was, what the heck is multidisciplinary practice? Like, we work within a kapapa Māori space, within an Indigenous space, and this is not language that sits within the mahi that we do. Do I think I know what they're asking? I think so. I think they're asking for a multitude of experts that come together to decide and assess what is right for our whānau. When I'm thinking about actually what does a multidisciplinary approach look like for us, and I can only speak for us at Te Ahi Kaa, I go back to the notion of our waharoa, and I think Kim talked about it this morning around the pōwhiri. The waharoa space for us is where we kind of all gather, and essentially it's the car park, and so we're at that space as whānau, and we're starting to negotiate with each other. We're starting to look at who's collecting the koha, who's doing karanga, who's doing whai kōrero. And for us, I know back home, that leadership is provided by our kaumātua. So as a rangatahi, my role is to be guided by our tikanga, but also by our kaumātua. And so when we look at a waharoa space, what we're really looking at is, well, actually, what are our skills? What are our roles? What are our responsibilities? And when we're entering into the marae atia, or we're starting at that pōwhiri, that negotiation between those within the car park is being done. And when we start to go into the pōwhiri space, we walk into the marae ātia, we are manuhiri in that space. And our whānau are mana whenua. When I look at it within a practice perspective, I often ask ourselves, who is manuhiri and who is mana whenua? Because it is those that work within the space, or experts or clinicians or whatever we like to call them, often see themselves as the one who's being able to make the decisions on behalf of whānau. If we switch that thinking to always saying that we are manuhiri and being invited into the space of whānau, then we have a different perspective in the way in which we practice. I'm not sure if that answers the multidisciplinary approach, but that's the way that I unapologetically state that that's just how we do it. And key for us is as simple as the way in which we do whakawhanaungatanga. That is with each other, that is with our whānau, but that is with our collaborative partners or partnerships that whānau have invited into this space, not determined by contracts or funders or other people who think they know what's best. It's about what are whānau saying, who are they inviting, and we will protect their right to do that as well. I think there was a second part of your question, Lisa, that talked about keeping your workforce engaged, was it?
Yeah, and helping them through tricky times.
Yeah, and I think, we're through COVID. Well, we're in that space of COVID, and I think if we go back to the very beginning of COVID, for us it was quite a natural thing in terms of the way in which we supported our whānau. And so COVID was new, it was quite different, but as Māori, while people were going home, picking their kids up from school, and being able to sit inside their whare, lock the doors and keep themselves safe, we were on the opposite end of saying goodbye to our kids, of leaving our whānau and saying because our community, our marae, our people need us. And that's quite a normal thing within our culture. But it's also that space where, and upon reflection, we've kind of looked at it as it's around mauri oho. It's that really proactive, intense energy space. And a lot of our team, it was around a space in which we were making decisions really quickly. It was high paced, it was quite creative, we were very innovative. We were navigating really uncertain times and uncertain spaces. We were juggling many hats, and we were really operating on a lot of adrenaline. There was a lot of motivation and collective responsibility amongst our teams, but also wasn't just at a provider space that was doing this mahi. It was our marae that were doing the mahi, our kaumātua. It was other people that we were coming together to do this mahi. And then, because we had no idea how long COVID was going to last, we then went into a space of what we call mauri noho. And so there was a space around being inactive. We started to notice some anxiety creep into our kaiawhina and into our teams. There was a lot of self-isolation, there was some retreating, and we started to see a lot of unmotivation. Essentially, our people were burnt out. That energy that we had to display at the very beginning stages of COVID was unsustainable, and it was absolutely exhausting. We then were able to move through to a space around mauri tau. So that's about how are we being settled, and that's about how do we engage with others, how do we feed ourselves, how do we feed our wairua, what does that actually look like, how are we supporting one another, and having the right time and energy to actually focus on what needs to be done, a sense of calmness and a sense of being valued. And why that was really significant for us is that this is all learning for us. This is upon reflection. We didn't know it at the time, but we now have the ability to look back and actually reflect with our team around, gosh, what were those spaces for us, and actually how do we manage them? And I also know it was there was a kōrero brought up earlier around how do we awhi our team. And for us, it's about being optimistic, but not too optimistic. It's not about the rose-coloured glasses kind of kōrero to our team. And then it's not about being defeated either. You know, if I go in and I'm feeling really defeated, that's going to spread like a virus amongst our team. So it's about how do we remain optimistic in such challenging environments, but there's that hope. And that's about our team being able to come at the table and have these conversations with each other, to feel supported. We provide rongoa for our team. We provide flexible work environments. There's a lot of things that we can do physically, but we also want to know that our team are a part of the vision so that they can see the hope for themselves. And as a leader, the role for me really is to be able to navigate the waka of our team through the really choppy waters so that we can get to some of those calm spaces. And not everyone's going to agree in the way in which that waka is navigated or the spaces in which that waka goes to. But that's the key around leadership, is you have to be confident in what you're doing. You pull on your skills, your knowledge, and know that if you have the support of your people, you have the support of your whānau. These are the really key things, because if you as leader get burnt out and stay within that inactive state, then that just filters into your team. So whakawhanaungatanga whānau, sorry. I'm like Stewart, I could talk forever on this stuff. Sorry.
And I also just wanted to go back to an earlier conversation that you and I had about recognising the unseen mahi and validating the skills of kaimahi.
Aye.
And the importance.
Yes, a lot of our kaimahi, we talk about this often, qualities versus qualifications. A lot of our contracts are prescribed around who is the right person to be in your team to deliver these services to whānau. And actually what we're saying is that, but what are the qualities that we actually need? Because our kaiawhina are able to move in spaces that are so foreign to many other people. They're able to access whānau in a way where doors aren't open before. We don't recognise that as a value. We don't recognise the mātauranga that our kaumātua bring to our service and the way in which they offer their support and their awhi. When we look at the pay scales, there is no kaumātua pay scale. We're like, that's okay, where's the highest pay scale that you have? Because that's where we see our kaumātua. But we're denied of being able to provide that. We're also denied where we have, our kaiawhina who don't come from an education in terms of a university qualification, but they come with an intensity of being able to work through a whānau hapu iwi marae lens. That is worth more than what a PhD, in my personal opinion, and our experience, because they are able to move and shift whānau in ways, and no offence to anyone who does have a high qualification, that I've never seen them able to do. So, yeah. Let's recognise the value of our whānau, that mahi with whānau.
Yeah, and if we look at that pōwhiri process, you've got to get the whānau to the waharoa first.
Yep.
And oftentimes our clinical and PhD whānau sit in the whare, but it's no good if we can't get our whānau through the waharoa. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, our whānau won't allow them to go through, they're not going to be sitting inside the whare, because if they cannot be at the waharoa, if they cannot go through those steps and stages, then they're not even going to be there to be accessible for our whānau.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you. I'm just going on to section 2 now, so we're going to have a look at some of the gaps and challenges. But I just wanted to say that the third part is about our aspirations and our solutions. So, Ants, can we start with you in a story about safeguarding adults that speaks to the biggest challenge or challenges around keeping your workforces up to date, energised and hopeful?
Well, there's just nothing there is the biggest challenge. There's a handful of us that work in the safeguarding adult space, and most of them are here today, which is, you know, if there's only a handful here, how are we supposed to serve the community right across our motu? Another one of the really big challenges in our space is parents and family members who get abused by their disabled family members because of behavioural issues and all those sorts of things. And that gets really, really complex quite quickly. And there's no real support for those whānau. I spent 9 months looking for somebody to come into the Mid-Central to do a de-escalation program for families and whānau that was for them. Not some clinical program that's prescribed in parenting classes and those sorts of things. They wanted tips and tricks of how do I stop Johnny smashing in the windows when he's having a complete meltdown. And so often our whānau just have nowhere to turn for that, or, oh yeah, we'll refer you, but it's like a 3.5 year waiting list to get behavioural support. So that's one of the big challenges. So capacity of the workforce. The fact that a lot of people don't even recognise that disabled people are within the whānau. And having those conversations and really digging down to if it's a violence situation, what's actually causing that? Because if you really, really unpack it, what you will often find is that whānau is not getting the supports that they need to uplift the entire whānau, to reduce the barriers for them getting the support that they need to stop Johnny kicking in the windows every second night. And I think some of that is systemic because disabled people, you know, we've been shuttered away, we've been pushed into corners, we've been sidelined from society. We may have gotten rid of the large institutions, but what we did was basically created lots and lots of mini institutions right around the motu without the community support that they actually needed. When COVID hit in Manawatu, I actually went out and helped a friend of mine have a shower because we just could not get enough caregivers out to people. We had somebody sitting in their own pee for 4 days when that stuff hit. And every time the lockdown happened, you'd see uplifts of disabled children in OT care rise hugely in every region except us in Mid-Central, because we've been trialling the Enabling Good Lives prototype, which has some flexibility in how we can use our funding. So that gave the families the ability to actually be able to use that funding how they needed to keep them all safe in such a trying time. And we all know when people get stressed, you know, things go down. And when you've got disabilities on top of that, you've also got to then encounter the systems that are not easy to use. You've got to encounter, I mean, for me, being takatapuia as well, I went to one appointment and I introduced my partner as my partner. And then in the notes it said current partner. I've been with her for 26 years. Yeah. So often it's also about understanding our community. We communicate differently. We have different methods and modes. I'm going to go home and crash for the next 3 days because this is just bang, bang, bang. And usually I need a little bit more time. One of the other big challenges is quite often, as I was saying earlier, disabled people and our community kind of get left till last because we're so complex. But actually, if you work all of that stuff out first, you've solved the complexity for a whole lot of other groups as well. And if disabled people can get around, understand information, a lot of our community don't even understand what violence is. So it's actually educating people that No, it's not okay that you can't choose your breakfast. It's not okay that my mate who has MS has to go and shower at the library because they can't get the modifications done to his phone. All of those things build up, and contribute to violence within tangata Whaikaha Māori and disabled people in general. We're also dealing with the systemic ableism and attitudes towards disabled people, that we're not worthy, that we're taking up space and finances. That actually, if you give us a bit of pūtea and give us the right support, we'd actually be far more contributing members of society and would be far richer for it. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Kia ora. Love your kōrero. Danielle, a story that talks to the main challenges in your work to prevent and respond to elder abuse.
Yeah, so we do a lot of mahi with our kaumātua, but we can't do that as just as individuals. Our kaumātua are part of the whānau, and so what's very important for us is to be able to work at that whānau level. One of the things that we've really been able to, I guess, to be challenged with is around our whānau's understanding of abuse, and what does that actually mean within the context of their whānau, and in particular with our kaumātua. And when I say that there is a misunderstanding around abuse, a lot of the abuse that we see is taking of Nanny and Koro's card, having their PIN and maybe going to help out and buying their bread and milk, but then also maybe taking $20 or $30 out so that I can spend that for myself as well. When we start to have conversations with whānau around highlighting the financial abuse, we get a lot of pushback about that because our kaumātua don't want us to make a fuss. They don't want us to cause trouble within their whānau, because then what does that mean? What does it mean if they are no longer able to live with their whānau, if they are isolated from whānau? A lot of our kaumātua say to us, well, actually, that's what I see as my contribution to my whānau. I have value if I can give money. And so we want to shift those conversations and actually say, what is the value that sits within our kaumātua? And actually, how do we challenge ourselves all the time, constantly, around how we actually are treating our kaumātua? In many instances, and even back home, we often will give our kaumātua a call. Can you please come and help with the tangi? Can you please come and open up our hui today? Can you please come and provide our karanga? And then once that role is done, we no longer need you anymore. And so what are we saying in terms of how is it that we value our kaumātua? And so it's about working with that entire whānau around raising some awareness. There are times where whānau are very well aware of their behaviour and what's happening. And we're not just talking about financial abuse, we're talking about abuse across many different sectors. And another one that we see quite common within our kaumātua especially is around the systems abuse. And so when we talk about systems abuse, we're talking about, we have a lot of our kaumātua who are receiving home care and community supports. The assessment process that opens up the key to entitlements for how many hours you get, ask questions very specific to our Māori kaumātua that is not perhaps asked to non-Māori. One of those questions is what are your natural supports? Oh, I see you have whānau who live close by. Therefore, you need to use your natural supports, and we will only grant you 4 hours of home care community support. Those very questions are not asked to non-Māori. And if non-Māori are saying, oh, I've got a daughter who lives down the road, they're like, that's wonderful.
I'm sorry, just they are being asked. That question is being asked to non-Māori.
Oh, it is?
It is, yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
Right, so,
yeah, definitely for disabled people.
So, for disabled, right, sorry, yep. Yes, okay, so for disabled people, thank you, Ants, they're being asked those questions.
Yeah, you've got a neighbour, you'll be right.
And what I know for our Māori whānau is that if you have natural supports, then that's going to reduce your hours. And so what we know from the numbers that we have, because we support both Māori and non-Māori, is that on average our Māori are receiving 8 hours of home care community supports as an average per week, with our non-Māori are receiving 24 hours. So that is a discrepancy, that is a discrimination there, and we talk about that as at a system level. And so we talk about abuse for our kaumātua, there's many different spaces of abuse, and so it's really important that when we look at the challenges that we're experiencing, that actually what are those solutions moving forward? Because there's a lot of challenges, but how do we actually then come together, work collectively, and actually start to make some of those changes that are necessary?
Yeah, kia ora. Kia ora. Thanks, Danielle.
So Danielle,
Sorry.
no, I just want to talk about what you're saying, and it's a huge concern for our disabled community moving forward with enabling good lives. The vision is to use more natural supports. What we're worried about as a community is that's going to be the first option, and that we're not going to get the government actually supporting, because they're going to go, oh no, you've got natural supports. So just want to talk about what you're saying, because it's a huge concern for our community as well.
No. Kia ora. Kia ora, Kia ora, Stewart. Yeah, you're up next. Can you tell us a story about Dove that talks to the biggest challenges you've come up against over the last few years that relate to how you're working across your communities?
There's probably three key areas that I see. One is that if you're going to take a whānau-centric, trauma-informed approach, that's a completely different approach to the historical way of working with family violence, which is a psychoeducational approach. And the evidence around, especially with males and a psychoeducational approach, isn't there. And that's a confronting piece of evidence, because it means that we've got to do something differently. As I started to think, well, now what does, and I started to ask the question, what does trauma-informed really mean? There are words that are bandied round, but we actually don't drill down, and what does that actually mean? I went out and got the staff to go out it was part of the questionnaire. Have you known ACE, adverse child incidents within? And most of that is sexual abuse. Even I, as a sexual practitioner, was surprised. We did it for the first 120 or so tāne that came through. The average was about 75 to 80% had known sexual abuse. Doesn't justify it, their family violence, but it helps give you an understanding as to what's there. When you start to talk with wahine, that's a whole different, it's just, they're almost all. It is so pervasive. Have we got the workforce to work with that? We're family violence. We've got sexual violence specialists, we've got family violence specialists, but we don't seem to be able to bring these together in a meaningful way. And too often, even within those relationships, there's been adult sexual abuse within it, and we don't talk about it. And how do we upskill our staff to be able to tread within this framework? So that was, then you start to talk about the trauma of colonisation. We're a tauiwi organisation. How do we partner within our community? And that's what we've been working on. It's because it's not appropriate for us to deal with that trauma, but we acknowledge it and then we actually take them through. Now that's a work in progress. And you're going through these changes and you're still doing business as usual. You've still got your contractual outputs that you need to meet, but you've got to give your staff headspace to be able to engage with that. And then it's been redefining. Who are we? We're not a kaupapa Māori. I don't want to go through a brown washing. process.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Because we're not, and though we've been through that process, and so we've actually chosen an English name because we, as a board and as an organisation, we felt we need to respect our role within the community. We're there to serve the community, and we've got to work together. And I come back, and as I said earlier, that takes time, and it doesn't stop.
Yeah, nice.
But it is something that I would throw out to us as, and I have a foot in both camps within the Toa Nest and within the family violence. How is it that we can actually leverage off each other's strengths, specialties? And I think as specialists, sometimes we've got to get over ourselves. The answer lies within the community, and how do we actually support and bridge that?
Yeah. Kia ora, Stewart. He just did my roundup, so for that section, I have to say. Oh, nice. Just in looking forward now, Danielle, can you tell us about your future thinking, about what you're going to keep doing to ensure your workforce remain energised and healthy and ready and sustained?
I think we're just going to be prepared. I mean, you can only prepare so much and for, so many different situations. But what we've learnt from the cyclones and floods and also around COVID is that our team go through these stages and these phases. And so what are the supports that we are able to put in place at each of the stages? So when they're feeling very energized and quite motivated, actually how do we sustain that a little bit longer rather than allowing them to kind of crash? And then the expectation is that how do we then allow them to kind of come off such a high energy space, and what are those supports? So they're going to change and they're going to look really different. And it's about making sure that our team is included in what the future looks like and what is that vision, so that they can instill their own hope within the mahi that they do. And I think also really is about we're really keen around whānau-led responses, whānau-led solutions, not putting the responsibility onto whānau. The systems weren't broken by whānau, we're really clear about that. But we also want to allow space for whānau to actually say to us, this is what we want, this is what we need. And then we are then in a position to say, okay, and this is what we can do to support an awhi.
Yeah, nice. Kia ora. Stewart, can you tell us about your future thinking and aspirations for Dove, and how, in line with Te Aorerekura and the national strategy you're doing to keep advancing an implementation of the workforce capability frameworks and sustain your workforce over time?
I hinted in my previous responses that the workforce has been a psychoeducational workforce.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you're going to engage with people and actually hear their stories and actually help them to understand how their stories actually relate to some of their behaviours. Now, this is not counselling. This is not psychoeducational process. A counselling process. This is actually, where do we meet in the middle? How do we join without justifying the reason for their family violence? It's so that's one aspect to it. I think as a sector, we see the risk of family violence, and we know that unfortunately wahine are dying in numbers which is totally unacceptable. But we also need to actually sort out who's safe to work within a couple relationship. Who do we have to take a very gendered approach to? Because one size doesn't fit all, and that's what we have done. We've provided a service that you will fit into this model, and it doesn't matter whether you're not. And that's why, as we've started to look at the early intervention, which hopefully will be run within the next, we've had to rethink the whole risk profile. We're about to start the process of looking at what does couples look like? How do we actually define, how do we measure the risk to see where do we actually work with them from a gender perspective, and then when do we bring the whānau together? Is it at the start? And that's what we're doing with the early intervention, bringing the whānau together at the start, then a little, some gendered, bring the whānau back in, then the couple. So starting to actually weave in and out in a safe way. That takes extra time. That takes extra energy. But if we're going to make a difference, we've actually set the rule that these people are young couples with children up to the age of 5. Why? We know that a child living within a violent home will grow hardwired to accept violence as normal. We've got to go upriver, and the resources have got to come up. So the workforce issue, training, supporting to think and work differently isn't small.
No.
And requires significant investment.
You know, Stewart, when I first met you and you'd taken over the helm at Dove, I wondered how long you would stay in this mahi. And I see you here today, and you're asking all these, and I look at the journey that you've been on, that you've taken Dove on, and you're still here, you're still passionate, and how is that? Because you didn't come from the sector. You kind of stepped into a pretty intense sector.
I think of Chad this afternoon.
Yep.
He said he is passionate about making a difference. I look at Mark, same. We have a responsibility to leave this next generation in a better spot than we've actually put it in. And that's my passion, is for New Zealand, for our communities, to be a safe place to bring up our rangatahi.
Yeah. Kia ora. Oh, Ants. Yeah, it's you again. Can you tell us about your future thinking and aspirations for safeguarding adults, and how you imagine strengthening workforces to respond to the needs of disabled people?
I could do a whole day on that.
No. I know.
Can you just run through the question again, Lisa?
Your future thinking and aspirations for safeguarding adults, and how you imagine strengthening workforces to respond to the needs of disabled people.
Kia ora. What I'd like to see with the safeguarding adults space is a cross-agency national process. We've seen in Waitemata that if agencies are actually communicating around an individual and cooperating and not trying to step on each other's toes or play who's the agency leading this, we've seen in Waitemata that we have far better outcomes for disabled people when people are actually working as one unit and just doing their little bit of what needs to happen for that person. At times we've got one agency coming in and they haven't spoken to disability support services, so that agency doesn't actually know that that person needs a talk device. They might not have good communication skills. So then that becomes it just compounds the issues for people. So if we've actually got a national integrated approach that uses the agencies and the people that we have in our community already, that's what I'd love to see. Because then we've actually got a response that we can go to immediately if we ask the 3 questions. Does this person have support needs? Can this person not remove themselves because of their support needs? And are they at risk of harm? That's when we know that there are support needs involved that we actually need to engage with disability services, engage with your NASCs, the needs assessment service coordinators, and actually have those conversations about what does that whānau actually need. Are their supports currently actually adequate? Because that could be one of the contributing factors to the violence within the home. There was a second part to that question.
I'm sorry, I've just got into listening to your kōrero because it's awesome. Yeah, strengthening the workforce to respond.
Yeah, so for me it's about mainstream services knowing that there are processes for working with people with disabilities and that there are organisations out there to help you with supported decision making and an individual's understanding of what's going on. And know how to refer to that, but also take the time that a disabled person needs and actually listen, rather than putting your own filter on what you think you hear. That would be my big one. And take the opportunity in each of your wherever you work right now, to actually have a bit of a look at how we can do this as a strength-based approach. And if you haven't heard of Enabling Good Lives yet, go and have a look. I can do a whole training on that too, but we'll just we'll leave it at that for now. Thanks, Lisa.
I'm really glad because I wrote that down. Enabling Good Lives. If you don't know it, please Google it, because after I met Ants, I Googled it, read it, and it was an awesome resource.
And people can actually do a bit of a self-reflection on how their organisation fits within that, and that will give you a pretty good key to whether you're going to be able to work with disabled people easily or not.
Yeah, and I think it's worth having that kōrero too around, when Ants first said that they view FV, SV specialists as mainstream, I had a little bit of a, and then I was going, so where do us as specialists, FV, SV, go to for that support around supporting our disabled whānau? And whilst we've been given some direction, if I look at the size and breadth of New Zealand and the amount of whānau that need that support, that's a big gap. There's a big gap on how we upskill SV, FV specialists to work with our disabled whānau. So, kia ora, Ants.
Kia ora.
Well, can you all breathe and swallow and dry your... Have you got dry mouths?
No, I've had a cough there.
I just want to thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart. Your kōrero has been awesome. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for the courage to come up here and speak to all our esteemed guests and have this recorded forever and ever online. Yes.
With a foot in both camps, as in sexual and family violence, one of the things that saddens me is that MOE and health almost don't come to the party. And how do we actually get them to come in a way that is actually meaningful? I look at a large percentage suffer addiction issues, and we do harm minimisation. They suffer primary mental health issues. There's this myopia that it happens within the hospital. Their understanding of community. So how do we actually get them into this fold? I look at some of the sexual violence prevention work and Ministry of Education. They don't understand it. So how do we actually, if we're coming together, what does that look like? Sorry, that's just my last little.
It's okay because
I've got a platform.
You're reflecting the thoughts of many of us, and baby steps. I just want to return to all the changes that have happened in the last 18 months. Yes, Do we need it to happen faster? Yes. Would we like it to happen faster? Yes. And hei aha, it is what it is, and there's been a lot of change in the last 18 months that we haven't seen for a few decades. Aroha mai to the panel question, the questions down on the TV. I'm sorry I didn't get to those, or to any questions from the floor. But what I do want to do is hand over now to for our reflections from Andrew Kibblewhite, the Secretary of Justice, and also the Deputy Chair of Te Puna Aonui, and to Geraldine Clifford Lidstone, CEO of the Ministry for Pacific Peoples.
Kia ora tātou. Can I just start by nicking to the panel to Lisa, Danielle, Stewart and Ants. I just thought that was a really rich and a really challenging kōrero from you, and there's a lot for the public servants and the ministers, I think, in the room to hear out of some of that, and part of what this journey is about is finding ways for us to take some of that forward. So I won't take too long because there's an awful lot in there, and there's a lot to get through still in the rest of the day. But I did hear a few themes that I really wanted to draw out. One that came through, I think, from all the speakers in different ways, and it wasn't just in this session, but it's worth emphasising again because it is such a core part of Te Aorerekura, is the strength of community and the importance of community. And the answer actually doesn't lie with us. We clearly have a part to play, but the answer that will really make a difference to people's lives will be the answer that comes from whānau and that comes from the community. And our job as the public service sees as the government is to help enable that and to bring that forth. And so I really enjoyed your challenge. You said it's not just community, you said recognise that community is not all the same. Yeah, you used to recognise, and the strength of your perspective from two different communities that are not mainstream, even in this room. I thought that was really powerful, and thank you for bringing that voice of diversity, forward. A theme that we heard a lot about, and we heard it in a whole lot of different ways. We heard the emphasis on qualifications, not qualities. We heard the emphasis on what sounded like strict kind of bureaucratic regimes for making decisions that didn't really fit. We heard kōrero about how the money is given and how it's constrained from government, and sometimes just a lack of awareness and understanding. There was a lot about how government doesn't interact very well with community, and that the challenge of enabling community is a challenge that I heard we were failing in too often, or that we have too much progress to make on. And I heard that in constructive ways, but in challenging ways, I think, from all of the speakers there. If I do step just to one side and think about this response space, so I'm Ministry of Justice and the justice sector. We're kind of the response bit of this sector. We're less often are we involved preventative and on sometimes in the healing side, but the response is what we end up having to do, and how that then influences into other ways. We are hearing and listening, including through Te Puna Aonui, to try and do things differently. There's a lot of work going on in thinking about victims and how they interact with the system. We know that when you come into the justice system, if you are a victim, you tell your story multiple times. You don't feel empowered as you tell your story multiple times. You feel let down and sometimes re-traumatized. We hear that, and we understand that we drop the ball between different parts of the system. We have got a work program at the moment which is trying to rethink the whole interaction from when an offence is first notified through to really when you're into the healing process, when at the time of parole and release and the like, and try and join up much better across the system. We know we have to do that, and we know that we're right at the beginning of that system. The agencies in the justice system are part of Te Puna Aonui, and it's one of the places we're having that conversation. If I think about the court system, we know that people come to the court and it feels like a foreign environment for victims and for accused and for families and for whānau, depending on what part of the court system you are in. We are doing all we can to support the Chief District Court Judge, Chief Judge Tamonu's vision and the judiciary's vision for Te Ao Marama, which is about a court experience that is different and that brings strength of community into the court, so it's not as alienating and re-victimizing and re-traumatizing a place. So it's a small part, but reflecting on the panel and thinking about response and the challenge we have as government to make our systems more responsive, I thought that was worth just reflecting on. So I would hand over to Geraldine, just acknowledging Mihi again to the panel and to all others in the room. I think I'm back a little bit later for one or two other reflections, but thank you to you and thank you to everybody else who's here as well. Geraldine.
Whātano Whātu. I'm going to rely on Puata's welcome and protocols observed when he spoke, so otherwise I'll take up the whole time with all the Pacific greetings. So thank you for having me here. I too just wanted to acknowledge all the hard work and the workers in the room. And this week, you know, having spent time myself working in this family violence sector, I spent the week kind of reflecting like, okay, what was it like working in family violence and working in the sector? And as I walked in the room and then listened to the first speaker, I was just like, oh, that's right. Jeepers, it's heavy. And so I guess it's just, for me, I feel like this is a bit of a whānau feedback, because as people that I work with in family violence, they start texting me about their views on the speaker and what should be done. So Ants, just to let you know, there is a group here of activists and agitators that will take you out to that big green space out there to toilet your dog, just to show that there is somewhere that you can go. So to the activators and to the lobbyists here and to you that have spoken about your experiences and journeys and the challenges that we have, Danielle, the rose-tinted glasses, I think is so important that you have to keep those on. You have to stay optimistic, because when you work in family violence, you are never light. And, you know, it's not a role that when you're here, you can go away and think that you are immune, or there's never a story that doesn't devastate you. You never lose that. So the rose-tinted glasses are so important, and I just encourage you to think of those whānau that come to see you, that come with their children, and that those children grow up and become amazing contributors to our society. And this is what you're talking about, the difference that you want to make, Stewart. The difference that you make is not in the horrific stories that we continue to hear, but in the stories of the whānau that have been healed through the work that you have done to represent either from those communities that the system has failed to respond to, which more often than not falls in the areas of LGBTQI, of disability, of Māori, of Pacific. But I have to say, the thing that also stands out for me, and no offence to the three of you or to anyone else in this room, is the ageing nature of this workforce. While we may look youthful, the challenges that our young people face today are so much different to what we are accustomed to. And I just think of these young people that are living their villain life, the work of the Cause Collective, that are trying to work with young people while aligning to cultural values that are outlined in ngā waka o kāinga tapu. That all that hard work is going to be a challenge for us as a community, but for us as a government, for me as part of the government, to respond and to meet those needs and to meet those challenges. So just in closing, can I just congratulate Te Puna Aonui and the work that you are trying to do. To all of you here that are working in the sector, can I encourage you that when you go home today, take a couple of deep breaths, take a bath, do those things that make you come back within yourself and to heal and to go on and work with the families that we all have to collectively respond to. Whawhai mo le awa noa.